This is the brand new Garmin Edge 1050 Cycling GPS, which is clearly the result of Garmin getting sick and tired of people throwing shade at their bike computer displays. Thus, Garmin said, hold my beer. All of the beers. The result is by far the fastest, most responsive, most brilliant bike computer we've seen to date, not just from Garmin, but from any bike computer company out there. But as always, there are trade-offs, and I'm going to get into those trade-offs in this video, as well as how it handled over nearly the past month of riding across all sorts of conditions, from road to gravel to mountain bike and, well, everything in between. As always, this video isn't sponsored by anyone. I'm just going to tell it like it is, both the good and the bad. The very first thing to know is the price. The price on the Garmin Edge 1050 is $699, which is technically $50 cheaper than the Garmin Edge 1040 Solar. Now, of course, the most important difference from a hardware standpoint is the new 3.5-inch transmissive LCD display, which has a 1000 nits brightness, roughly the same as some cell phones out there, with a resolution of 480 by 800. In terms of brightness, it's insane how bright this screen is right here. If I've got, for example, the Karoo 3 next to it side by side, they look pretty close right here. But here's the kicker. These are both only at about 20% brightness. So I'm gonna go down there, bring that down there, swipe over, get the brightness, and now watch as I blow out the exposure on the camera. So here we go, full brightness up there on that one, and then over here, full brightness to that. And again, like, it's just insane how bright these tear. You probably can see from there, they're just a white screen. Of course, in reality, I can see this just fine. But what matters here is not actually the brightness, at least from a comparison standpoint. Sure, this is plenty bright. Let me be very clear about that. But what matters is how fast it is from a processing standpoint and just the user interactions. I pulled these back down to roughly about 25 to 30% so you can see what that looks like. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and swipe up there to get rid of things. Do this one at a time so I can actually kind of focus on this. I'm gonna go into navigation. I'm gonna choose courses. I'm going to choose this Ringgart course from last night. It's going to load up that 70-kilometer course. I can look at it. You can see the summary details. I can go back. I can go back again. I can go back again. I can go menu. I can go through this very quickly. And I'm choosing to go through this very quickly just to show you the fact that it's responsive. Versus over here, as you know from my review there, everything's just a little bit slower. A lot slower across the board. And it's not a big deal because the Karoo 3 is a perfectly capable, great little bike computer. It's just that a lot of people think you have to make those trade-offs in terms of the responsiveness of the display to make it work on a bike computer, and clearly here you don't. Of course, you do have to make a different trade-off when it comes to a bright display and all the power hungriness that comes with this, which is battery life. And it's really important to note first that Garmin says that the Edge 1040 and 1040 Solar are sticking around as a, quote, core part of their lineup. And more importantly, they're getting all the same feature firmware updates as this unit as of today. More on that in just a second. Point is, if you want the crazy long battery life of those units, you're still going to get all the features. Now, with that said, the battery life claims on this are about 20 hours in regular riding mode with all the things turned on, up to about 60 hours in battery saver mode. In terms of my real world testing, it's roughly kind of depends on what you're doing. For all my rides, I had navigation enabled, I had power meters enabled, I had radar sensors, I had heart rate sensors, I had everything enabled, live tracking, group track, etc. In that configuration, I was getting about 20 hours of claimed battery life across the board. So kudos there, that with everything turned on, you get about 20 hours. However, the other day I went for a ride where I turned down the brightness on this to about 20-30% or so, which is still brighter than the Edge 1040, like just for clarity there on that. And I still had everything else enabled, navigation and sensors and group track and all the things, or GroupRide as it's called. In that case, I was estimated about 30 hours of battery life. And of course, that 30 hours of battery life is more than double what this was showing at about 15 hours of battery life. So again, I wouldn't overthink the battery life too much for most people. And of course, battery saver is still an option if you want those extra battery hours. You see right here in battery saver mode, it's estimated at 73 hours, and that's including sensors and navigation and all that kind of stuff. It simply reduces the backlight a bit to a very visible level, as you can see right here, and reduces the GPS down to GPS from multi-band. Now, I can already hear some of you asking about overheating in the display. Will it overheat in hot, sunny conditions? If you're watching this video on the day this releases, you know that globally it's hot as whatever right now. And so almost all of my rides over the last few weeks have been in very hot conditions, 90 to 94 degrees or so Fahrenheit, and direct sun, no problems at all. However, I took it a step further. I went out and got my FLIR camera to validate the heat on this, and I put it in the sun without any wind at all for a few hours and let it record a ride with navigation, stuff like that enabled. It wasn't going anywhere, but point is it was doing all that, and no problems. It didn't overheat, and the heat of the unit itself registered basically the same as its surroundings. So Good job there. But ultimately, you have a choice. If you want longer battery life, you're going to get something like the Edge 1040, and if you want more brilliance, you're going to get something like the Edge 1050. It's a simple choice between the two Bs, brilliance or battery life. Except for the third B, which is bike bell. I'm not kidding, by the way. Listen. There you go, it's a bike bell. And here's the kicker, I live in Amsterdam, and this bell tricks everyone out there into thinking it's a real bell, which is sort of like the pinnacle of success on electronic bike bells. There's a lot of horrific sounding bike bells on the streets and bike paths of Amsterdam. This one, people think it's totally normal and totally fine, they move out of the way. But the really interesting part here is you don't necessarily have to touch a screen and hit the bell button. You can also go ahead and use the remote shifter options on various shifting systems to do it right from the handlebar. So I configure the SRAM access bonus button, so right from the handlebars I just tap it and boom, bike bell. And it even offers to do that the second you have a shifting system connected. It's super clean and cool. Now of course that bike bell depends on another new hardware feature, which is a new speaker in there. You may be saying, didn't the original Edge have a speaker? It had a beeper, not a speaker. A speaker allows it to make all sorts of pretty tones, and so you'll notice that all the tones are different on this. It sounds more calming, I guess you could say.
Approaching summit.
The downside to that, though, is that something happened in the last firmware update over the last few days, and it got a little bit too calming on the churn notifications, such that I was totally missing them over the weekend on my rides because they just sounded like nothing. They didn't sound like a very sharp churn notification. So I brought that back to Garmin and said, yo, what's up with this? It was fine for like weeks, and now all of a sudden it doesn't sound quite right. And they've already started digging into that and figuring out if something got swapped on the back end, but they said they are going to correct it, whatever it is, and do it really quickly so the tones are actually audible, because they were not audible in the wind. And as you can hear from the bike bell, it's bloody loud. So it's not a problem of the hardware, it's just that something changed in the last firmware that made that churn notification a lot more quiet than I would prefer on a windy day. And hey, just a quick note, if you are finding this video interesting or useful, go ahead and whack that like or subscribe button down there. It really does help out the video and the channel quite a bit. The next new feature they've added is road hazards. And now hear me out on this. I know some people were already dissing this in the rumors and leaks and stuff, but it's actually surprisingly cool. So the way this works is you tap a screen right there and you'll see the hazard option. You can tap that and you've got basically 5 categories. Now, animal, obstruction, pothole, slippery, or hazard. Animal is of course for that dog that is always there, that one spot always wants to chase you. It's to help the next person behind you that doesn't necessarily know that crazy ass dog is there. You can tap that. Obstruction, pothole, the rest of them are pretty straightforward. Now when I choose to report one of these things, what happens is actually super slick. So if I choose to tap animal and I choose report, it'll automatically do that, by the way, so you only have to tap it once, it just completes it for you. At that point, it transmits that via your cell phone up to Garmin Connect and then outbound to all the riders in the area. And not just riders with the Edge 1050, but riders with the Edge 1040, the Edge 840, the Edge 540, the Edge Explorer 2 to Garmin Connect. All that happens in about 30 seconds. It was super impressive to see out riding with Des of DesFit, where I could lay these obstructions kind of out in front of him, and then he would get them tripped behind me. And of course, we laid hazards all over the place. There was like these bunnies and gophers and stuff that kept going across in front of me. Like, they were a hazard, so I marked them as such. Now, if the next person comes along, do you see that hazard? Yes or no? And if the total upvote of yeses falls below 50%, that particular hazard goes away. Garmin says there's also some nuances in the timing of how long those hazards last before they kind of like decay out. In any case, I can see how people would have thought this would be kind of stupid if you only had it on the Edge 1050, but with it going back to the entire X40 series as well as the Edge Explorer 2, it'll very quickly become pretty useful in a lot of areas. And I don't see why it's a bad thing to know when there's a giant pothole around a blind churn before you hit it and fly off on the road and then get eaten by the dangerous dog. That's just my 2 cents. Now, the next set of new things is the expansion of the GroupRide feature. Now, the GroupRide features have been around on the 540, 840, and 1040 for a while now, and it simply shows you the location of other riders and lets you message back and forth with them. You join a group ride using a code right there, or you can create a new ride and add a route to it. But now there's some additional features on top of that. The very first one is GroupRide instant detection. So you imagine you have a group of say 5, 10, 15, 20 people, and of course not all of them are going to be together in the same group. Someone may have fallen off the back a closet kilometer or whatever the case is. If that person that fell off the back of a kilometer then runs into a tree or that dangerous dog gets them, it'll go ahead and trigger a crash detection and notify everyone in the group that someone has crashed. I mean, that's a pretty useful thing. The next thing then is a new GroupRide challenges. These are effectively Climb Pro challenges in your GroupRide if you have a route or course loaded that's automatically distributed to everyone. So think of it like a Strava Live segment for any climbs that you have out there. And award the fastest rider that goes up that particular climb a trophy. And the key is it's the fastest split across that segment, just like it is on Strava Live segments. So it's not the first person to the top of the hill, it's the one that has the fastest time, which gets into all sorts of fun tactics in the middle of a ride as to how you time that to beat the other people in front of you. Now, the way it works as you approach the climb, you'll see the climb screen show up, and it basically says, hey, this climb is coming up here. It's on the list of challenges, or basically climbs for that particular ride, and then you'll see everyone on that climb as you're riding. Then when you complete the climb, it'll give you your total climb time and tell you whether or not you won, depending on who is left behind you and who's ahead of you, etc. In some cases, it'll immediately award you the win if that's the way it's going to work out. In other cases, it'll automatically award someone else the win if their time is faster than yours. And then in some cases, you just have to wait a little bit of time for things to like reconcile with the group because not everyone's done yet. Overall, this worked fine-ish for me, but there is a bit of a delay there. So I would say don't focus on the results like the very second you cross that line. Instead, wait a couple minutes for that entire thing to reconcile across all people's phones and devices and stuff like that. So it shows the winners on the screen there. The last bit you're going to get is the new GroupRide awards at the end of a ride. So these awards are basically handed out as like trophies. I mean, there are technically trophies to people on the ride for all sorts of random things. Garmin says they have about 80 different awards that can be handed out, though I only saw like a few of them in my testing, but I only had a few people, so maybe it'll vary as I get more and more people in there. The awards are based on different things. Some of them are like simple speed awards. Some of them are the time spent off course, like in other words, who is the most lost. Some of them are based on power meter data. Some of them are based on Garmin power meter data, like seated and standing time. Like there's all sorts of different awards out there. And again, you'll see them at the end. I was getting a message that not all riders have completed when all riders had very much completed. Garmin says they've implemented a change just last night server side that should resolve that, but I haven't had a chance to retest it since last night to find out if that's been fixed or not. You'll also see these awards listed in Garmin Connect Mobile as well as Garmin Connect and of course on the unit itself. And again, these also go to the Edge 540, 840 series and 1040 series. The next new feature is road surface data to the device. This means the device is now aware of gravel versus road versus mountain, all that kind of stuff. That means as you approach a non-paved segment like gravel, going from asphalt, it'll give you a notification ahead of time saying, yo, you're about to go off the beaten path there. It's as simple as that. Now, the next item though is pretty notable, which is they've significantly increased the gradient responsiveness of the Edge 1050 as well as all the X40 units via the firmware update. If you've ridden with other units in the past, for example, the Hammerhead or Wahoo units, you know that there are differences in how they respond to gradient. I've made entire videos on this for many years in a row showing those differences. In general, Garmin is slower to show very fast changes in gradient. So if you imagine a hill that goes like this and really quickly goes up, that really quickly part right there, the Garmin's have been much slower on that than Hammerhead and Wahoo. However, inversely, there are cases where Wahoo and Hammerhead would get it wrong, being overeager on some of that stuff. Here is a climb from the other night I did, just to kind of show you this. And it's sort of hard to see because everything on a GoPro looks sort of flat. But what you should notice here is how quickly the gradient responds on the Edge 1050 compared to the Hammerhead, in particular the Wahoo. The Wahoo seems a bit more smooth, especially as it got to those like 9 and 10% brief moments of gradient change there, where the Wahoo was still lagging, and this was the same across all of my other rides as well. Now, the next new feature is a new Wi-Fi Map Manager. This is pretty straightforward. You can now download maps directly from the device right here without having to plug it into a computer using Wi-Fi. I can add and remove maps, something you could do on their competitors, but for the Garmin's, you always had to do via something else. I still want to see them make smaller map downloads so that when you do get into a situation where you travel to Europe and forgot to download the map, it's not 19 gigs over the hotel Wi-Fi. That kind of sucks. When I gave that feedback back to Garmin, they said they definitely hear that and is something on their list to go ahead and implement. There just isn't a given time frame for it. Now, next up, Garmin has added Garmin Share. If you've been around the Edge block in the past, this might sound a little familiar. Essentially, in the past, you could transfer files like course files back and forth between units. Then Garmin got rid of that in the X40 series. It is back now, called Garmin Share. You access it via the Garmin Share option in the menu. You tap Share. I can choose a course. I'm going to tap this one right. Let's see. There we go. That'll work. And I'm going to share one item over here on this other unit for my wife. I'm going to grab that. There we go. and it is ready to share. I can see the selected device, the Edge 840, and wait for a response over there. Do I want to accept it? Yep, and there we go. Confirming the passkey matches on both of them. Yep, that works. Garmin says that this will become a bit of the Garmin standard for devices beyond just these devices right here. You're going to see it on watches over the course of the summer, existing watches, etc. And it'll become the way they allow you to transfer stuff back and forth across all their devices. Again, hopefully that sticks around. The next new feature Garmin's added is Garmin Pay contactless payments. So to access that, you'd swipe down from the top there, you choose a credit card, you choose open, you type in your secret code, there we go, and there's my credit card. I then tap that on any sort of contactless payment reader. And now, some would argue, and I'd probably agree with you, that this seems a bit like silly. Almost everyone has their phone with them and their phone has contactless payments on it, or maybe they have a Garmin watch and that has contactless payments on it. I don't disagree with any of that. This hasn't been super useful for me, but it's also something that costs Garmin virtually nothing to add given the payment infrastructure they already have. And if you have that rare scenario where your phone has died and you don't have payments on your watch or whatever the case is, this could be handy. Sort of like that $10 bill in your saddlebag, it's the exact same concept when everything else is dead. Next up on the list is an entirely revamped user interface, as you're seeing right here. This is the one feature that's not going back to the other units because this is heavily dependent on all those new processor changes. Essentially, I can swipe down from right there, and I've got kind of more or less the same features you saw in the past: training calendar, GroupRide, history, notifications, weather, etc. Up at the top here, I've got my different profile types, so road, gravel, mountain, etc. In the middle here, I've got this kind of dynamic area. Here's my last ride. Here's a course I added last night. Here is what it wants me to do today, a recovery, a 30-minute ride, and so on. I can tap into menu and go through pretty much the same navigation bits that you had in the past. I can then swipe down from the top to get kind of this panel of the different same things you had in the past. So here's the segment explorer, here's the climb explorer, here's my wallet I showed you a minute ago, here's the controls panel, tapping again, here's more controls for adding a course and power meter calibration, here's text messages, and then here's weather. All this is the same. I do find this whole thing is a bit confusing at times from a ride standpoint. As I just explained it to you, it probably makes perfect sense, but when you're riding around and you're just all of a sudden you see this, you're like, oh wait, how do I get to this or that, or these buttons move around? This needs a little bit more finesse. It's not bad, it's just a little bit confusing at first, especially the first ride. It just didn't really work out super well for me. More interesting though is a new revamped ability to change your data profiles, data pages. See this right here, data screens? You can go ahead and look at all your screens right there. You can add new screens. Let me just go to the right here to find the end of my list of data pages. So these are the pages right there. See that line? That's where you can adjust and go bigger or smaller on that. I will still point out that this Strava Live Segments page on Garmin's devices just sucks. Like, it's as simple as that. It really sucks, especially compared to Hammerhead or Wahoo, but really Hammerhead, which is like the top bar of the best Strava Live segment pages out there. I think Garmin really needs to spend a little bit of time on that and fix some of the suckiness that comes with their particular page. Now, a couple quick spec things that I didn't mention before. The first off is this thing is a beefcake in terms of weight. It's 161 grams compared to the 126 grams of the Edge 1040. Garmin says that's simply almost entirely the battery. The battery is big, and thus this thing has achieved beefcake status. And of course, another quick note is that it maintains the same IPX7 water resistance, it maintains 64 gigs of internal map storage, it maintains multi-band GPS or GNSS, and it maintains all of the ANT Plus and Bluetooth smart sensor support, and all of that works just like it did in the past. Now, before we get to accuracy, as I promised earlier on, here is a quick chart of all of the new features going to all the existing units. In short, everything that's a new feature that doesn't depend on hardware, like the bike bell, goes to the Edge 540, 840, and 1040 series, and then a number of the features that are not considered performance features goes to the Edge Explorer units. It's kind of as simple as that. Garmin says going forward, they see the Edge 1040 and 1040 Solar at that same upper level as the Edge 1050 from a new feature standpoint. And as long as there's no hardware blocker there, they're going to implement those new features on that unit as well. So what about accuracy? Simply put, I've had no problems. I'm just going to go through like a montage of different GPS accuracy things and then elevation accuracy. You can see here from a trail accuracy standpoint in the mountains, it is pretty much spot on with the other units that I had with me. Then we got this gravel route here as well. Also in the mountains, no problems there as well. Then we go out into the farmlands here in the Netherlands. No problems there as well. I've had no problems with GPS accuracy, and that doesn't come as a surprise. Garmin has pretty much become like the de facto leader on GPS accuracy in all their multi-band devices over the last couple years, and this holds true there as well. Likewise, when I look at elevation data across all of my different rides, I don't see any issues there either. Everything has been spot on across the board. I've got all of those charts in my full in-depth written review in case you want to check those out and dig into the raw or original data a bit more deeply. Okay, so where are we overall? Well, look, I don't have many complaints. As you saw throughout this entire review, the only quirks I had were a few very minor user interface things, more like wording choices in most cases than anything else. Overall, this is not a rushed product launch. This is what happens when you stick the landing on a product launch and you don't try to rush it out at the last second. I had no wonky power meter data, I had no routing issues, I had no crashes, no anything. Like it just works across the board. It's just pretty straightforward. In many cases, just like the new Suunto Race S review I released earlier this morning, where Suunto took the time to get it right. They didn't rush it out there, and thus they got a good review. But the only nitpicking item I would say that I was kind of disappointed to not see is that when they rolled out the Edge 840 a year ago, they added dedicated buttons on the side there so that you always had the choice between buttons and touchscreen. And while the touchscreen here has been great in rain and gloves and all that kind of stuff, there are still times where I just want some buttons to be able to tap and tap. And so I was a bit surprised to see them not add the two side buttons. They do, of course, have the buttons on the bottom right there, but not some side buttons for going up and down menus. Of course, this unit won't be for everyone. It'll be probably for like 95% of the people out there, the 95% of the people that have no desire to ride more than 20 or 30 hours every few weeks, meaning you'll probably only charge it once or twice a month. But of course, for those that still want that crazy long battery life, like the 70, 90 hours of the Garmin Edge 1040 Solar, that's still there, and in theory, it's still going to keep on getting all those same features. Thus, you still have the choice, at least according to Garmin, between ultra long battery life and ultra brilliance. As simple as that. As always, if you found this interesting and useful, whack that like button or hit subscribe for plenty more sports technology goodness. Have a good one.